let's talk a little bit about your early life, where you were born. Carrie?
I was born in Duluth, Minnesota, 40 miles from the hospital, where my mother delivered 7 children eventually. So, on a small dairy farm, and went to Minneapolis and worked there for a year, and then went into filled out an application for the Peace Corps, which was something new at the time, relatively new. Got accepted, and went to Chile, training in Notre Dame first, and then went to Chile. So.
Now, Jerry, how did your path? How did you?
I was born in this section. Well, actually in Worthington, but the home at the time was in the neighboring quarter, and my grandparents lived here as well as my uncle, and we moved here when I was about 5 years old.
So you grew up in this house that we're in right now?
Well, I didn't grow up, but I aged here.
Never grow up. So then, right? I think that's a song, maybe even. Talk to me about how you two met then.
We met in Peace Corps training,
Okay.
and there were 60 or so people from all over the country, and we didn't know each other at all at the time, of course. So
I think there were 90 of us, and about 30 people were selected out, and then we ended up in Chile at approximately the same site.
Okay. And so how did you get to meet? Was it just a chance meeting, or?
No, just in the major, introduction of all the people that were there in Peace Corps training, because that was about a short 3 months, and they separated us out into different language groups, and taught us some intensive Spanish, and by the oral method, and which means you never saw written words, you just learned to speak more naturally because you heard native speakers speaking the language. And then it was a long time before I realized that que se mejore pronto wasn't one word, and what it meant. It meant may you get well soon, and and it was part of a film strip that we were on. And I was in language group 4 or something. You were in a different language group.
I was slower.
So then when you finish your training and you both ended up in Chile?
Mm-hmm. That's what it was. Only Chile. We were
okay.
4th group ever to go to Chile with Peace Corps.
Tell me, okay, first of all, I have a question. What prompts 2 young people from Minnesota to go into the Peace Corps?
Well, Minnesota and California were the leading states in at the time of volunteers. I thought that I wanted to do something good, but I think that was maybe even overshadowed by the sense of adventure. And so I had applied. I hadn't decided for sure if I would go, but Sergeant Shriver, who was the first director of Peace Corps, was in Worthington, must have been 1962, for the National Corn Picking Contest, which my father was participating in.
Okay.
So when he gave his speech, we were sort of distracted between watching the results of the picking contest and listening to his speech.
So that inspired you to...
That kind of cemented the idea.
Okay. Terry?
I don't really know exactly, except that I used to walk back and forth to work, which was a 6 or 7 block jaunt. And
In Minneapolis,
in
St. Paul.
Minneapolis, yes. And then I would look at the people riding on the buses, and they, you know, we all do it now, of course. You just stare out of the window and you're just thinking what your thoughts are or whatever. And I thought, I don't know if I want to do that. I think I want to do something else with my life. And I honestly don't remember where I picked up the Peace Corps app or how it was exactly, but it didn't take too long to get a response. And I think they were looking for people with some agricultural experience and education background, perhaps. And so that worked out well. And I think, yeah, it wasn't a very long time period before you were offered to go to a certain country. Little did I know that you didn't have to accept the first offer that they sent to you. You could have said, no, I don't really want to go to a country with that far away, or that speaks Spanish, or that, you know. But I just said, okay, I'll go. And so that.
So you jumped right in?
Jumped right in, yes. And
So what year is this?
1963.
1963. Okay. So what is the country of Chile like? What was it like when you landed in Chile? What was it like in 1963?
It was, we landed in Santiago de Chile, and it was a large metropolitan area, which looked a lot like where we had just been, because we started our trip from New York City, and so it wasn't that much different, other than people looked slightly different. Chile is quite a metropolitan country with a lot of immigrants from all over the world. In our area, it was predominantly Spanish, but the South is European, more European. European in terms of Northern Europe, Switzerland, Germany. We weren't in the South, but that whole population shows up in the capital city.
So then, where were you? So once you landed in Santiago, then where did you go? What was your work there?
well, first off, Chile, I should say, Peace Corps never goes to any country without the country saying, we would like Peace Corps to come. It's not like we say, we think we would be good candidates to come to your country. So you have to have a sponsoring organization. We didn't have anything to do with organizing that. That was all organized by Peace Corps. So we always had a sponsoring organization, and so someone that kind of had your back, so to speak, and helped you through the process. I was where we ended up was in a Catholic girls' school, former Catholic girls' school, and in a big hacienda house, and which had been turned into an education for farm rural kids and women, girls especially. That was to comprise of gardening and exercise and your regular coursework as well. And so, and I taught some physical education in that process, and just communicating with people was it was a struggle for several months, but all the people are so friendly in Chile, and so that was a very nice, very welcoming. And then we are still in contact with many of the people that we knew while we were down there all those years ago. So.
The history of the community had been a large plantation type farm owned by a family called La Rain. And they were like the first 20 families of Spanish families of Chile. And there were no no people to take it over. So there was a government program to buy these farms from the owner, and then they split the farm up into 40 new owners. And so it was an agrarian reform colony, and I worked outside in the colony.
How long did you live in Chile and work in Chile for Peace Corps?
The whole contract was for 2 years,
So you were both
including
over
trip, yeah.
for 2 years. So then,
Well, it was a little bit less than 2 years.
Yeah, in Chile itself, yes.
so what is your maybe your what was the biggest challenge while you were doing that? The biggest challenge over there?
I'd say there were two: language and getting accepted.
So, kind of the reverse of how someone might feel when they come into the United States from a different country. Yeah, the same
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Sure.
Was there any particular memory that sticks out? Any difficulty? Anything that happened?
Oh, there's a lot of stories, but
So one thing that seemed to be a monumental change for me is that early on I was put in charge of collecting tickets to go into a soccer game. And there was one individual, a young person about my same age, that was going to challenge that and was going to come in without getting a ticket. And I threw him out. That seemed to break a bit of ice.
They kind of knew who they were dealing with then. So how old were you both, approximately, in 1963 to 65?
I was 19.
Okay.
And,
And I was 63, I was 24.
So that's a huge change. I mean, you were in Minneapolis, that's a metropolitan area, but and then moving to a different country. What is that like? I mean, especially back then when we don't really know, you didn't know a whole bunch of, you didn't have access to information that you have now.
No. I guess because we were under umbrella organization of Peace Corps, they provide our medical needs, and as an example, and because we were attached to this particular colony area, so there were layers of support there, and so, like he says, you just wish you could speak a little more, and some of the people were so patient, asking about youth and your time in the past, and I think we probably blew some of the stereotypes of that. Most of the people in other countries see the Hollywood films and pictures and things, and so they think everybody lives in these big fancy houses and drives all these fancy cars. And so when you talk to them and say, well, no, that isn't exactly right, you're trying to express yourself, and I think they come to understand that
And everybody's beautiful.
Yeah.
And we have no warts.
yeah.
Oh, probably, right? Yeah, I'm sure that they have a complete misconception about America and the people in it, just as sometimes that's what happens here, as we have misconceptions.
And
about
much
people.
more so then than
Without
it is now.
communication.
Yeah, you're talking about
Yeah.
a lifetime ago, really. I mean, and so many changes.
And contrary to the new immigrants that come here, we had an organization that was doing two things. One, they were teaching us language and about the country, cultural sensitivity, And the idea was we were supposed to become as Chilean as we could and work with Chileans, and we were paid at a level where we could fit in, not above that level. And so that was the premise of the program.
So once you finished with your time in Chile, then what happened? When you came back to the United States?
Well, we got married in Chile.
You did?
Yes.
Oh, tell me about that.
Are you better at that than me?
Well, the community decided that they were going to throw the party for our wedding, and we had a minister that came down from Santiago, and one of the Peace Corps reps gave me away, so to speak. At that time,
The director of
the
country.
director that was in country at the time, yes, and at that time, parents didn't fly all over the world to see their kids get married, and so.
Right.
So the only people that we really knew were the people we worked with, and the Peace Corps volunteers that were scattered out along the length of Chile, many of whom came to the wedding celebration. I think there were 400 and some people, and they provided all the food and yeah, it was.
You had a big wedding in Chile.
Yeah, yeah. And two of my friends that were better seamstresses than I was, they made my wedding dress, and so. Yeah. But you know, it all worked out well, and people still talk about that. When we go back, we still see people that. Well, sometimes we refer to that, and they'll say, "Boy, we didn't know if we were going to get enough meat to put on the grill." It was one of the questions, comments that we'd heard.
So the people of Chile must have been lovely people.
They are. They really are still.
Probably one of the most friendly populations that we've encountered.
So then, once your time was up there, tell me about what happened when you came back to the United States. And
Well, I had applied, I had my undergraduate degree, and I'd applied to several places for graduate degree.
okay.
I applied to the University of New Mexico in egg education, and I applied for and that would have been a master's degree. And I was offered an NDEA fellowship to get a PhD in animal nutrition, ruminant nutrition at South Dakota State, from which I had graduated. Well, that looked pretty attractive, and it's right in the area, and so that's what I took up.
So you were living in Perkins
Yes.
and going to graduate school.
And I was went part-time to working toward a business degree at South Dakota State, and
Is that where
didn't
you
finish
met
it.
your family? In education, I'm sorry. You said your degree was in...
I didn't have a degree at that time. It was only a year
Oh, okay.
that we were there, more or less,
Year and a half.
because,
Okay, sure.
and that's where you can take it over.
Well, yeah, this has caused me to think a lot about, at this stage of my life, about paths taken and paths not taken. So I had a great undergraduate experience at South Dakota State, but either South Dakota State had changed a lot since I'd left, or I had changed a lot. Well, I didn't have that sorted out at the beginning, but I found it very provincial, and I wanted to work on applied science, not pure science. I got into a project where it was more pure science, just because of the size of the department. It was a new PhD program, and it just wasn't working for me. It was a difficult time. And so then I switched with another graduate student and got a fellowship for going forward with my program, but it would be at the master's level.
Okay.
But then I started looking around and interviewing for different jobs, and I was offered a job with Peace Corps in Bolivia as an agriculture advisor.
Okay.
And we took that, and consequently a path taken, which I think was tremendously positive.
So, fork in the road, and you took a different path, like many of us do several
Yes,
times in our
yeah,
lives,
right.
right? So tell me about that then. When you moved to Bolivia, what was that like? Wow.
Well, again, there's an umbrella organization, so they help you find a place to live, and again, our medical needs were covered, and we had our second child in Bolivia, and let's see, we were there
3 years.
3 years or so years. Came back, went back.
Extended our contract.
Yeah.
Okay. So so you were there how long then? Total?
That stint, we were there about 3.5 years.
Years, and then
After that?
Well, I just should say about that experience, all of a sudden you're not working alone in a site. I was working with probably 100 volunteers, some missionaries that were doing agricultural work, and working at the national level. So you had a Peace Corps team.
Oh, okay.
So you had administrators and you had technical people, and so it was really a much different experience than being out on your own with the Peace Corps at the community level. So after that, was that the question?
Yeah. After
Yeah.
that, after that stint
So
in Bolivia.
yeah, so we had applied to work on several Indian reservations. One was on Pine Ridge in South Dakota here. Came back and interviewed for, we came back and both had hepatitis when we came back after 4.5 years in Latin America. We had gotten hepatitis, so we were in a period of recovery.
Sure.
Um,
Oh, wow.
and
And you had 2 children at this
yes,
time?
yes. Our
Fantastic.
return trip was cut short because of it. We visited people in Peace Corps people that we'd known in Bolivia that were working in Ecuador. I got sick there, didn't know what it was. And then we visited some people in graduate school that we'd known in Brookings, and they were working in Bogota, Colombia, and Terry got sick, and that's when we discovered we had an extensive trip planned before that. We were going to buy a car from somebody in Panama and then drive up through Central America and Mexico.
instead we landed at the Minneapolis airport.
Sicker than.
Jerry's sister said, I had never seen 2 more bedraggled people. And then, of course, we had our kids with us. And
So you had is it a long recovery?
Yes, it better be long. If you cut it short, you can suffer long-term,
Long-term,
lifelong
yeah.
consequences.
Right,
So
that didn't
Yeah.
happen.
yeah, you feel somewhat okay, but the minute you push yourself, it's hard on your body in ways that you don't realize until later
it
years.
can bring a relapse, and
Yeah.
then you can have permanent liver damage.
Oh my gosh. Is that something that a lot of people suffered from that lived there?
Well, the
Was
people
it
that live there get it early on. Our kids were never vaccinated for it.
Okay.
Because if you get it early on, it isn't such a problem, and then you have a
Then you
certain
have
amount of
some
Sure.
immunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's true for the local population as well. So
And we call ourselves here a first world country. What are some of the other challenges besides health things that you faced when you were different things that are different, obviously, in Bolivia than it would be in the United States?
How about shopping?
Well, we lived, as was customary for most foreigners at the time, we had separate housing, of course. Most of us had a maid, and the maid would do, that were families, okay? And so then the maid would do childcare, the maid would do grocery shopping at the market, or the maid would do laundry. Poor ladies, they did all this kind of stuff, and so, and I went to the market a time or two, but they knew how to buy things. They knew how to prepare some of the things. Now, it wasn't as different in Latin America as it is, say, like if you were been in Africa or the Philippines or some of the other areas where the diet is a whole lot different.
Right.
And so we didn't have that challenge so much. So that worked out well and was expected, and it helps the local economy as well. So to hire people.
So you came back to the United States sick as dogs, 2 young kids, I'm guessing. Then what? Once you recover, where do you land?
Well, we had applied for working on Indian reservations in Washington State, South Dakota, and Montana. And I
As an
had
extension agent.
interviewed in South Dakota and in Montana.
And so, who won? Who got you?
Well, I was offered a job in South Dakota, and I wanted to look at the job in Montana, and I was particularly interested in Montana because the supervisor of Indian programs had worked in Afghanistan for 6 years and had international development experience. And so we went that route. Had we gone to Pine Ridge, we would have coincided exactly with the second wounded knee, so that might have been interesting.
Yes. Oh my word. Well, talk interesting. You've had an interesting life, and speaking of paths, not a path that many take, certainly around here. So how long were you at that position?
We were a little over 3 years there.
What was that like?
It was, after all the experiences we'd had working with Indian populations in Bolivia, I thought that we should be able to fit in pretty well in Montana. Well, that turned out to be true. In the beginning, I would go out to somebody's place in the country on the reservation and knock on the door, and nothing happened, but I would see the curtain pull back and look out and see who it was, and then it drop shut again. But I was fortunate then to get involved with a home maintenance program. I worked, we hired an Indian aide, and we worked together on that program, and that sort of got me into the community. Again, fortunately, we were able to integrate with the community fully and feel free to travel all over the community. Worked a lot in people's homes. Started working in financial management for farmers and ranchers, and helping them get loans through the BIA.
Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Bureau of Indian Affairs, yes.
Okay. I've spent in my career a fair amount of time and did stories on in Native American reservations. It's not the cheeriest place around, is what I found. How did you deal with the, I don't know if it's the plight of the American Indian or the community, and how were you accepted?
Well, you get to a point where they talk about the white man and as if you weren't the white man. And so it was a really fulfilling experience in terms of being included in the community. One of the problems on Indian reservations, they're a population that is inundated with a lot of organizations trying to help them. And so, and plus creditors looking for, to get loans paid back, and other, religious groups and whatnot. And so I think there were 65 different organizations working on the reservation when I was there in one way or another. And people are just overwhelmed with that. And you don't know, the people don't know of what value these various organizations might have to them.
Resistance.
Yes.
And for me, it was a little different because both Julie and her brother Mike were in school, or some sort of school, and so there was a natural community there. And the school was in the small town of Harlem, which is for a couple miles from the reservation housing that we had, and so there were. I interacted with a lot more of the people that were staff and members of the community, and teachers and things like that, and while trying to be supportive for what he was doing. So.
And raising kids was just huge.
Yeah.
So how long were you in Montana?
A little over 3 years.
About, yeah.
So then,
Then your dad had a question, right? He asked if you were. He said he was going to retire, and were we interested?
okay, interested in coming and farming here.
Well, we sort of had a track record. Maybe we weren't able to focus. Every place we'd gone, starting with Chile, I always looked at the option of staying there. And so I had in my mind a little project that I could do and make a living and live in Chile. Well, then when we went to Bolivia, the same thing happened. And I think each time I checked with my dad to see if he was interested in having a partner or stepping aside, but he wasn't ready. So we considered staying in Montana. We had some ideas, and then when we finally came back to the farm, the idea was maybe if we could be successful for a few years, we would move back to the West and start a small grain operation, being wheat, winter wheat, or spring wheat. And because we had figured out a way that it could be very financially beneficial, buying suitable rangeland and converting it to cropland, which was being done. And I was working in that field, so I was familiar with it. But we ended up here. The path not taken in the path.
Right, we're back to that.
Back
right?
to that.
Yeah, and so tell me about that. How did that go?
Well, One thing that prompted us coming back is when we were on the reservation, the kids would keep asking us, well, where are our cousins? Where are our uncles? Because the tribes are pretty family oriented, and so that made us think about. And
Around family.
yeah, another thing that there are Hutterite communities up in Montana, and there were some sociological studies that were presented on media at the time, which was television, that there were these Hutterite youth that would leave the community, but they didn't have options. They'd end up going back to the community. Well, we suddenly realized we had so many options, it was hard to decide.
Right. So let's see. We're back farming now.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about that. So what year is this?
1974.
1974. You came back to the area
in March.
here, and
Moved to the farm.
moved to the right here.
Right.
Yeah. Well, actually, this part of the house wasn't here,
Oh. Right.
but yes, and his parents moved to town.
Okay. And so, what was it like farming in 1974?
It was lonely. I've been used to working
Sure.
with people.
Yeah.
All of a sudden we were here.
Right.
My parents, especially my dad, were very supportive. Want to stay out of the way, but be supportive,
Right.
which was pretty, I think, astute. And so we started doing about everything that everybody else did farming here at the time. My dad was a bit of an innovator. He was ahead of the curve in terms of tillage methods and things like that. We had learned in Montana that from these wheat farmers that they could really have an interesting lifestyle. They could be tied down for about 6 months of the year, and to do all of the planning and all of the maintenance maybe tied down for 9 months of the year, but then they could have 3 months free to do some other things. So we didn't get into livestock, and we just went with grain, and give us some opportunity for continuing education, involvement in community organizations, and some travel. Terry would say that I traveled and she stayed home with the kids for school, but
That's. I'm not going to challenge that statement. But yes, it was a good time, and in spite of the blizzard of '75 and
I remember that.
yes, huddled around a Franklin stove, wood burning stove, and so. But everybody had
raised
those.
on a farm, or
Yes, I
you
was.
were. So you were familiar with farm life.
Yeah.
And so the kids are in school, and you're busy doing all that as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
with-
Yeah, some of that, yes, and did some interpreting because at the time, there weren't too many people that could interpret Spanish to English, you know, in the hospital or the school. And then as the years went by, that got more sophisticated, and you had to have more training and pass exams, which was a good thing. And there were, at that time, and still are, increasing numbers of new immigrants here that are very capable of doing those things and being supportive of them. So I never did go off to additional training for interpreting.
So you were here when before and then during when the influx of immigrants came um, into the community. It was a hard time, I think, for some people that had lived here prior or had lived here their whole lives. I'm sure that you had a different experience, being that you'd been living in those
other places,
Spanish-speaking country. Talk about that a little bit. What was Worthington like at that time?
Well, it was Asian at first, and then, it eventually became Central and America and Mexico. We sort of put it this way: we traveled around the world a lot earlier, looking for diversity, and came back to Worthington, and here it was.
Right. Isn't that the truth?
And then part of that was also right after the Vietnam War, where there were efforts to help the people that had helped us over there, and so there were churches and organizations that helped sponsor many of the people that came. And then after a while, like a lot of the Asians that came, they lived here for a while, and then most of them moved someplace else. Whereas the Spanish-speaking contingent, for the most part, knew people in other parts of their countries or relatives or whatever, and so that was more of a natural progression for people to come to someplace that they knew somebody, and to work here. And so that I think is there were quite a few efforts to try to get, and still are. I think we as a community struggle with that somewhat as to how to engage with everybody who is here and still maintain your own contacts and the groups that you belong to, your families. Families are a lot more spread out now than what they used to be, so there's more travel involved. But I think from our perspective, from what we hear, most of the people that are here are very happy to be here and want to be good members of the community.
Let's talk about the farm and how that farming has changed and how you don't live here anymore. Talk about that a little bit, about how you did your farming and then what happened after that. Did you go back to Bolivia then?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, which part?
I did ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, that was a multifaceted question.
Let's talk about the farm a little bit. Let's kind of go in chronological order. Let's start with how long you farmed before you went back to Bolivia.
Okay, let's see. We started in '74, and we went back to Bolivia in November of '79 for a short-term contract. When we came back to farm, we more or less continued with the cropping operation the way it had been done. And then through continuing education and we decided that we would start to do conservation, not only conservation tillage, but no tillage or minimum tillage or strip tillage or something where we didn't destroy the soil so much. And there's a whole science to that I won't go into, but so we went that route. We were different. It wasn't widely accepted in the community. But then we had a friend in Bolivia that was working on a contract with a consulting firm in Washington on cooperative development in Bolivia. And he was leaving his contract early, and he wanted us to come down and carry on. And so we went through the interview process with Robert Nathan, an associate consulting firm in Washington, and then went to Bolivia with the family to live in a different area of Bolivia that worked with a large co-op.
Yeah.
And then how long did you do that?
I filled out the contract in 8 months, and then we decided to keep the kids in school in Bolivia for the rest of the year. I left the contract because the project wasn't going well. There were people involved that didn't know Bolivia. It was an international team from Ecuador, Peru, United States,
Central America,
Paraguay, Central America. It was an ideal team situation, but only several of us had worked in Bolivia and understood the psychology of the peasantry, the campesinos. And so I helped put in place somebody who had worked in the area, a Bolivian that worked in the area a long time, to replace me, and then a new co-op manager who had lived in the community a long time. Very capable people, spoke English, Spanish, and Quechua, which was the language spoken by the co-op members, the primary language. Most people were also fluent in Spanish, but there had been too much damage done already, and so the co-op eventually failed.
So you came.
Well, we'd already left. We
Left.
moved to
Yeah.
La Paz. We put the
Okay.
kids into the American
cooperative
school.
Okay.
And then our son came down with Hodgkin's in that process, and Terry and our son came back to Mayo Clinic for treatment. And Julie and I stayed there for a few months for her to finish school. I don't know how many schools they were enrolled in that year.
Yeah, I think there was something like 4, but because I did the Calvert system with them as well when they were when we were in Bolivia, and they also went to a Bolivian school in Sucre, each of them to different schools, and so they had a lot of schooling and lots of starts and didn't finish too many grades, they just because they moved on and age-wise, and they were fine. So.
And then what year was that when you came back then?
That would have been 1980.
1980. And then was that the last time you left the country to live?
Yes.
Okay, so you've lived
Short
in the United States
We've done some
permanently.
short-term
consulting
things in between.
Oh, okay. In Central America?
In Costa Rica, Bolivia, and Lithuania.
So, of all the paths that you've taken, would you change any of that? It's had to have been difficult in some respects, living in different places, and what I guess looking back and all that is kind of not futile a little bit, but wow, you guys have had a life.
Well,
Doesn't it show?
No, it's just completely interesting. I wouldn't expect that, I don't know, in Worthington we'd have someone, with a life like that. I mean, the Peace Corps alone is something so unusual.
Well, I think it's a great opportunity, and I'm becoming a proponent that we should have some sort of incentivized national service aside from the military. I think it would get people out of their comfort zone. It's a great opportunity to grow beyond university, beyond vacation, beyond travel. It's living and learning from people that are different than you are. It can happen in this country. It could happen in the inner city. It could happen on an Indian reservation. It could happen bringing people from the inner city to the rural areas. And what would it take? It would take some innovation. It would take a bit of money, but I think it would be worth the effort.
The growth and the lessons learned are, you can't learn it in university. It's just like a lot of things, you have to be merged in.
And I think it applies to us at all ages, Get out of your comfort zone because not much grows there.
Right. That's right. That's right. Not where the magic happens, as they say, right? So tell me about some recent things or with this farm itself. It's been in your family for how many years?
Well, we were sort of distracted. The legend was it was mustering out pay for the from the Civil War, but that turned out not to be true. So we were always looking at the patriarchal side of what came down from, but it came down from the matriarchal side.
Oh, interesting.
And so this actually was just been worked out in the last year or two. Actually, the farm went to a family member in 1911.
Okay.
And that was my grandmother on my father's side.
And that's where, and then...
It was her aunt that got it first, yes, through marriage.
Yeah. And the husband died, and then she got it. And
so your grandmother?
It would have come through her aunt.
Mm-hmm. Okay, through her aunt. And so that's over a century, and then some. Tell me about what the sustainable farming, the new solar thing, or maybe it's not new, that you've been working on.
Where do I start on this? You ask about sustainable farming.
Yeah.
We, after doing this approach to not tilling the soil, leaving it the way it is, we then retired from that and rented it out to a neighbor here, who carried out the same type of farming. And we've been interested in sustainability for a long time, so we're sort of absentee now in a way, and so we looked at a couple of things. One is, I think about 29% of our carbon footprint is transportation, but 25% of it, the next biggest chunk, comes from producing electricity. So if we're going to make any progress in terms of carbon, we need to generate electricity differently. And I guess that's what precipitated that.
And you'd worked with...
I'd worked on a wind project, community wind project
for many years.
Near Reading. It was Community Wind South with 9 other individuals. And so that was lended to that too.
And so how is that playing out now?
Well, you have to have an equity partner, and the equity partner owns 95%, and we own 5%. And then at one point the equity partner said, we'd like to buy you out. And most of us that were on the task force were aging out, and so we sold the remaining interest back to the a major company.
So what's your life look like now? I mean, you've had more than interesting life. What's life like now in this chapter?
That's to be continued or to be decided. We've had quite a few different ideas and thoughts, and part of it is we have been traveling with a camping trailer in the wintertime for a couple months, and then it's like 3 months, and now it might be more than that. And basically going to national parks, state parks, and other parts of the country, mostly in the south, the west, a little bit in the south, but and so we're still trying to decide how what that next chapter is going to look like, and so.
Well, we've been involved in a lot of community projects, and I like the idea of stepping aside before too much time goes on and moving on to something else. So I think to carry on, we've been looking at electric vehicles or electric assisted vehicles. We've been driving hybrids for a few years now. Just trying to live a life that matches what science and society is telling us. And so we realize we're aging out of things. We play pickleball, we downhill ski, and we bike. Just keeping track of our biking, we've biked in 4 countries and 9 states this past year. And so we haven't been sitting around too much, although I kid people that I wear out slippers more than I do shoes.
Well, as my grandma would say, you're not letting any grass grow under your feet. You're on the move. What has it been like being the type of people that you are, with the ideas that you have, in an area or in a place where sometimes that isn't popular? What is that like? You're ahead of your time, obviously. That doesn't, no one needs me to say that. But that has to come with a certain pushback, I'm guessing.
Yeah, there's pushback in the community, and in the ag community, but at the same time, there's so much research being done on so many different aspects of living a more sustainable life for the whole planet, never mind, as well as ourselves, of course. And you could argue, well, if you get in a camper and you go around the country, how sustainable is that? Well, none of us are perfect, I guess, but I think I suppose mostly it's the willingness, obtuseness perhaps, to look past what other people say or do, and try not to be critical, but at the same time say, well, the world is changing, and this is how we feel we can contribute, or at the very least fit into it a little better than what might have done in the past. And so
I think it helped to live in another country. I think it helped to have a small group, I'd say rather small, 12 or so, of supportive, like-minded friends. I think it's helped to be somewhat confident in the direction, but still questioning. Things change, things grow, and maybe it helps a little bit to be thick-skinned.
Doesn't hurt. You're lifelong learners, obviously, and that's so great. What has surprised you along the way about this life?
How varied it can be and how spontaneous, and the ideas that he can come up with that I go, really? But he's very creative and very thoughtful person, and I think he assumes that I'm going to follow along, which for the most part I have. So
It sounds like
yeah,
it.
and
I would put
after
it a
our
different way.
yeah,
I would say you're a team member, a full-scale team member in this farming thing.
yeah.
Terry doesn't like to travel as much as we do. You know, we're both flatlanders from Minnesota, right? We get by chance. We go to Chile with the Andes Mountains and the coastal range. You're very close to mountains. And then we go to Bolivia with the Andes that are even taller and so it's been a growing situation, and
But it does limit how much you can be involved in this community. Your involvement in different organizations that rely on people being here to help carry things through. And you say, well, I'm going to be gone, or, you know, and so it cuts both ways, you know, and certainly many of the people that never leave here have had major experiences of their own and contributed to the community as well. So we just did it maybe in a little different way. So.
well, you know, one thing, there's tourism and then there's travel. And, you know, I think traveling, if you research where you're going a bit, and we're not always the best at that, get out of your comfort zone. I spent 3 months in Antarctica and worked there and learned so much from the scientists there. I just worked as a support person, transportation. But the effort they go to collect information and how much the climate is being changed at the poles. We had record warm temperatures just in the short time I was there. And it makes you realize that there's no planet B. And I guess I'm disappointed at where we're at in the country at this time. The divide, the lack of concern, the lack of cohesion, and I just am at a loss of where we go from here, other than if we could have some more common experiences that get us out of our comfort zone.